What's going on, guys? Today we're going to be working on my new ATV. All right, guys, here it is. This is my 2003 Yamaha Raptor 660R. A little backstory, I had been looking for an ATV for a good while, but the market's been pretty crazy on them, and I didn't want to spend a crazy amount of money on something so old. The opportunity presented itself for this one from a friend, and I was able to pick it up pretty cheap because it wasn't quite running right when I got it, and it does need a little bit of work and definitely a refresh. It didn't really start great and it was not running well, so I took the carbs out, cleaned them up a little bit, and put everything back together, reset some of the air mixture screw, and that pretty much solved the problems. Now it's time to replace a bunch of things because this was sitting for a number of years before he put it all back together and tried to get it running again. But first I'll give a quick overview. I admit I've been out of the four-wheeler game for about 10 years, so I don't even know all the parts that are on this, but there is a good amount of aftermarket parts that are actually kind of nice. To start off, it has non-factory wheels, and the tires are actually in really good shape, which I was happy to see because that can be costly if you need to replace the tires right away. It does have an extended rear axle, so it's actually wider than stock. I don't know exactly how much, but you can kind of tell it's a little wider, gives you a little bit more stability, and it's felt really nice so far riding it around here. And then you can see here it has some Nerf bars on the side, these little protectors that go behind your foot. It also has a skid plate that goes underneath the rear sprocket and rear disc. That's kind of nice for riding in the woods. And there's a number of other protector type plates, and that one in there is for the rear brake master cylinder, so your tire doesn't kick up anything that could damage your brake lines. And it does have an aftermarket Yoshi exhaust, and that does sound pretty good. Otherwise, it's pretty basic. I think engine-wise, it's stock. The stock jets are in the carbs. But now we can move on to what we're doing today. So first off, we're going to do an oil change and filter. So I actually did change the oil and filter just about a week ago, and I've put a few hours on the machine since then. So I wanted to do that so I can kind of flush out the system, and then now I can replace it again with some fresh oil. Since the previous oil was sitting in there so long, it might have had some buildup around things, so I wanted to change it once and then change it again right away. Next up, we're going to be putting a fresh NGK spark plug in it, and then we're going to move on to a new chain and sprocket. The current chain is definitely really old. It's been sitting, so it's rusty, and I think it's really stretched out. It's definitely loose. So we're going to be doing a new chain and a new front sprocket. I think the rear sprocket's okay, and we're going with a one size down front sprocket, and I'm going to do that so we can get a little bit more acceleration out of it as opposed to top speed, because I'm mostly going to be riding this in the woods on some tight technical stuff. So it's going to be a lot better to have some acceleration, and I don't care that much to go super fast in the top end. Next up, we've got some new grips and a new bar pad. So the grips currently are trash, and they're like super sticky. If you put your bare hand on it, it gets all like stuck to you. And the bar pad is totally ruined, and like the sun faded it, I guess, and cracked everything. So we'll put a new bar pad on there. And then next we've got fresh brake pads for the front and the rear. They do work well, but I can tell that the rears, at least what I can see, are really worn down. I can't really see the fronts, but you might as well replace both at the same time. And then lastly, I picked up a used front bumper on eBay because it was totally missing from this. So I ordered one that was a 660R, but then this one came in and it says YFZ 450R on it, so we'll see. It looks like it's gonna fit. I might just need to put some spacers in there, and I'm gonna be repainting it. Obviously I need to straighten it out first. It's a little bent, as you can see, but I'm gonna be repainting that before I put it on. And I'm also gonna be painting some of the frame components. Like on the front A-arms, they are a little rusty, so I'm gonna sand those up and just paint them to preserve them a little bit. And a couple other spots on the frame. I'm not gonna be trying to get this perfect, but just preserve, so, you know, to stop that rust and we don't have an issue of it cracking or breaking through. And to do that, I've got some rusty metal primer, and then some of this Professional Series high performance enamel that I use on a lot of different stuff on my cars. So I know that adheres really well and lasts a pretty long time. So that's the plan for today, basically a nice refresh for this thing. So let's get started. All right guys, so I just got everything finished up and it's looking pretty nice. The only things I didn't do were the front brake pads. I did take a look in here. I could see with a flashlight on the inside and the outside that the pads were actually in pretty good shape. They weren't much thinner than the brand new pads I had, and it is stopping fine. The front brakes are working well. So for now, I'm gonna hold off on replacing those front brake pads. And the only other thing I didn't do were the grips, because I mistakenly ordered some dirt bike grips. So the right grip is wider for a twist throttle. So not a big deal, they're pretty cheap, they're like 10, 15 bucks. So I can replace those once they come in. But everything else I got done. So starting from the rear, I put the new chain and the front sprocket on. That went pretty well. I got a chain breaker meant for ATV chains. Of course, I didn't see the master link at first on the original chain, so I just cut it because it was trash anyway. But the new chain, I was able to use the chain breaker. It worked well to resize it. Basically, I matched the length of the old one, and then I tightened it up. These screws here actually are how you tighten the chain. You have to loosen a couple others. There's one there, one up top, and then you can tighten and adjust those screws to tighten the chain up. And the front sprocket wasn't actually too bad once you could get a wrench on there. It's pretty big. I think it's like a 32 millimeter, so I didn't even have a socket for that. Used a combination of an adjustable wrench and some channel locks, and I got that to loosen up and take the sprocket off, clean everything up, and replace it. And then the rear brake pads started to be a little bit of a pain, and I realized it was because the parking brake was preventing me from compressing the piston in the caliper enough to get the new brake pads in. So when I did try to loosen it up, I ended up breaking the bolt. So for now, I actually removed the parking brake, and here is the cable. So I just removed it for now. I will probably replace it. I just need to get a new bolt. And I saw that it was already bent, so I think then when I just tried to loosen it, it just sheared right off. But once I took that assembly off, I could compress the cylinder enough to get the brake pads in, and they seem to be working great now. And so I also did change the oil and filter again. I got the spark plug changed, no issues. And then around here on the front, I did some painting. So I sanded off some of the loose rust that was on these A-arms on the bottom. The worst part were on these bottom two here. So I sanded that off, then used that rusty metal primer and the paint on top. I believe this paint was called like an aluminum color, and it seemed to match pretty well with the old. Obviously it's a little shinier, but I think it looks pretty good. And then same thing on the front bumper. I did have to straighten it out. So this centerpiece was a little bent, so I was able to just hammer that out. It's pretty easy to straighten because it is aluminum. Gave it the same paint color to match everything else. And like I said at the beginning, I did have to use some spacers down here. So that actually worked out pretty well. I think it's about a ½ an inch that I needed to put a spacer on both sides. So that was basically to adapt this YFZ 450 front bumper to fit on the Raptor. And then I just needed some longer bolts that I already had. So I used those on the bottom and then the standard bolts up top, and it mounted up perfectly. And then the last thing I just replaced was this bar pad. I just had to make sure I got the right length, and it's the same color scheme, and it looks a whole lot better than that old one. So let me know what you guys think of the new ATV. It started a little rough, but I think it's looking pretty nice now, and it's running great as well. And don't worry, I am working on the Z3. It is almost done. I'm just waiting for some better weather to paint the fenders. So last thing to do is to take this thing for a little test drive.